Hello, this chapter or this synopsis is on chapters 19 and 20, which talks about stimulus and taxes. So we have these economic cycles. The basically the government wants us, ideally, they would like us to see economic growth, just slow and steady as she goes, so to speak. But what happens is we have these ups and downs because the economic cycles are just, it's not smooth. So when the economy is expanding, which that's kind of what we have going on right now is an expansion. The problem with expansion is inflation. And so what will happen to try to curb inflation or slow the economy down is the Federal Reserve will increase rates. Or there's another chapter on fiscal and monetary policy, so I'm not going to talk a lot about that, but this right now. But to slow the economy down, what the government will either they'll increase taxes or they'll decrease spending to slow the economy down, or the Federal Reserve will increase interest rates. Conversely, if you're in a recession, the Federal Reserve will lower interest rates. That's monetary policy to try to stimulate the economy. But the government, which is fiscal policy, the federal government will increase spending and or lower taxes to try to stimulate the economy. All right, so what we're talking in these two chapters are stimulus and taxes. So how does fiscal policy or how does the government try to stimulate the economy through stimulus and taxes? So there's basically two elements to stimulus. They can increase government spending or they can lower taxes. Now, not to be confused with stimulus where they're just, giving us checks. So, when I wrote these notes and when that book was written, this was before COVID. And so the book is, when they talk about increased government spending, they're talking about, maybe giving a rebate check here and there if we're in a recession. That's what President Bush did when we were in a recession, or increased spending on, say, increasing spending on infrastructure projects to create jobs. And so that's what we mean by government spending. During COVID, in addition to increased government spending like that, they were simply just giving us money, the stimulus money. But anyway, it has the same effect. So let's go back to the two elements of stimulus. Increased government spending is going to stimulate the economy because they're putting money out there, they're putting people to work, or they're just giving us money to hopefully spend. Also, lowering taxes helps the economy because if you lower corporate taxes, basically that's cutting the cost for companies, right? So that increases their profits, cuts their costs, they're going to expand. If you lower individual taxes, that's like giving us all a raise. So we have more money in our pockets to hopefully spend. We have to spend the money for that to help the economy, though. If we just save the money or pay off bills, pay off debt, that doesn't help. All right, so two elements of stimulus: increased government spending and lowering taxes. Now, here's the problem with stimulus. Stimulus is kind of like kicking the can down the road. Eventually, we're going to have to pay the piper, as I've mentioned in prior chapters. So stimulus causes our national deficit to grow, increases the national debt. Eventually, we're going to have higher taxes as a result of the stimulus. So the purpose of stimulus is to prevent or turn around a recession by expanding economic growth. It's supposed to increase total spending in the economy. That's supposed to increase total employment and decrease the unemployment rate, which helps the economy. This is the problem with stimulus. A reduction in the problem with stimulus is that a reduction in current taxes must be met with an even larger increase in future taxes. So here in the book, they talk about if you give people tax breaks, tax credits, where you're reducing the tax rate temporarily. A reduction in current taxes, eventually you're gonna have to raise taxes to offset that. So actually what they talk about in this chapter is that lowering the marginal tax rate is better than just giving people stimulus money or giving people rebates or giving people credits. Because if you lower the marginal tax rates, that's a permanent raise, and that's going in to incentivize people to work more. Okay, so let me explain this a little bit better. People aren't stupid. Sometimes I think the government thinks we're stupid, but we're not stupid. We can do simple math, okay? And we know that if we get a one-time rebate check of like $600, $700, $1,400, if we get, one-time stimulus or maybe a one-time tax credit, that's not going to help us in the long run. That's going to help us one time. So for example, when we had one of the recessions during the Bush administration, I remember this distinctly. They gave everybody, if you were married, you got a $600 rebate. If you were single, you got a $300 rebate, and they mailed all these rebate checks out to everybody. So the idea was that we were supposed to go out and spend this money, but it didn't really help at all. It didn't help us get out of this recession, of the recession at that time at all, because people were worried about that they weren't going to have jobs. They used that money to pay bills. That doesn't help the economy expand if people aren't spending. And so it didn't really work. So the point of all this, the point of this, of number 4 is that if you just give people a one-time check, one-time credit, that doesn't really help. But if you lowered the marginal tax rate, like was done in the Trump administration, that really helped the economy. If you recall, really until COVID hit, the economy was doing quite well because stocks were going up. And one of the reasons for that was because the Trump administration lowered taxes. So if you lower the marginal tax rate, then people realize, oh, that's a permanent raise. I'm going to be paying less taxes going forward. I have more money. And so so they'll tend to work harder. It will cause economic growth. So it's much better to just lower the marginal tax rate. All right. So anyway, that's number 4. Okay, so what happens if when government spending increases? Well, eventually it's going to cause an increase in taxes. And if this government spending, as they mentioned in the book, is financed with borrowing, then that's going to result in higher interest rates. It's called a crowding out effect, where if the government also becomes a borrower, then it increases the demand for money, interest goes up, and it also crowds out private spending. And so that's not good either. So because if you crowd out private spending, then consumption will decline, business investment spending declines, and that can lead to lower economic growth. So what are the conclusions of chapters 19 and 20? Here's the main takeaways. Stimulus, long-term stimulus, it's really only possible through a decrease in the marginal tax rates. Lump sum tax cuts do not work in the long run because increased government spending is offset by cuts in private spending. So these temporary things like the stimulus that we were getting all through COVID, yeah, maybe it was a stopgap for people, but in the long run, it's going to hurt us because it's going to lead to increased taxes for all of us. If they would have just, they could have cut the tax rates more. The Biden administration could have, but cutting the marginal tax rates is really the only way that this fiscal policy will work for trying to stimulate the economy. Okay, so that's in a nutshell, that is the gist of chapters 19 and 20. And until next time, I'll see you for the next synopsis, which is SB 21 and 22. Take care.